No matter how hard Inocencio Gimenez tried, he couldn't complete his rounds until 9 o'clock. He was still in process when an unknown herald shouted in the corridor, "Everyone to the conference room for the briefing." Immediately, he heard the sound of doors slamming, and everything in the department went into motion. Inocencio cast an annoyed glance at the clock, while the young nurse Esperanza looked at the doctor with devotion in her eyes. "Inocencio, maybe the chief won't keep you long. I actually think it's not necessary to do rounds every day. You could do them every other day," Esperanza suggested. This sweet girl had joined their department just a few months ago after finishing medical school. She tried to please everyone, but didn't always succeed. The older staff members criticized her flattery and didn't approve of such behavior from the young employee. Her thoughtless suggestion irritated Inocencio, and he quickly put her in her place. "Esperanza, keep your personal opinions to yourself and focus on your direct responsibilities. This is a medical institution, not a dance club." Esperanza received a reprimand in the male ward and instantly blushed as she became worried. The stack of patient cards in her hands began to vibrate with increasing frequency. Although Inocencio immediately regretted offending the nurse, who was respected by the patients, it was too late to backtrack. He left the ward and hurriedly walked to the elevator, where a line of medical workers had already formed. Smiles gleamed on the faces of people in white coats, and the impending professional holiday was the main topic of conversation while they awaited the elevator. The senior nurse from their department joined the group of waiting individuals. "Hello, everyone. I have good news. I heard from the reliable sources of information that there will be work awards tonight." This news was particularly exciting for the female staff members, while one of the men remarked, "They'll give us a pittance. They'd better use that money to update the fleet. It's impossible to drive on this old junk. Speed enthusiasts are afraid that there will be a breakdown or accident on the road. Who will they blame then? Of course, the medics themselves." Inocencio recognized the complainer as the chief mechanic, but the senior nurse didn't even spare him a glance. She threw into the charged space, "Arturo, you are used to complaining about everything. You're not satisfied with this and not satisfied with that. Maybe if you pulled less things from the garage, there wouldn't be so many problems. It seems like everyone has forgotten the conditions in the old hospital." It was a fair point that was difficult to argue against. Even the chief mechanic fixed his gaze on the mosaic floor, and only his loud breathing indicated his disagreement with the senior nurse's opinion. Indeed, when Inocencio moved to this city a little over 2 years ago, the hospital was highly regarded. For a small provincial town with a population of 20,000 people, this modern medical complex, built as part of a pilot project, was a luxury. But since significant resources were invested in its construction, the expectations for this healthcare institution were much higher than for other regional units. The hospital staff, at least a major portion of it, diligently carried out their duties. Only the chief doctor, Julio Pena, fully grasped the importance of his mission. He had headed the old hospital for almost 16 years and hoped to remain in charge for a similar duration in the new complex. Not to ruin his personal plans, Julio, being a responsible leader and a skilled organizer, tirelessly safeguarded the reputation of the entrusted institution. And to motivate the team, he used a simple yet effective method: 5-minute briefings. The latest meeting, held the day before the Healthcare Workers' Day, began with a grandiose speech of the chief doctor. "Dear colleagues, it's almost our professional holiday, and I must inform you that a tremendous responsibility for the health of the present and future generations rests upon us." Julio had an unremarkable appearance, and he wasn't particularly tall, but God had endowed this ambitious individual with brilliant oratory skills. He intuited where to emphasize and where to pause. He didn't deviate from these principles this time either. After a short yet impressive opening, Julio took a prolonged pause and scanned the room. The audience responded with modest applause to his message. Julio cleared his throat gracefully, cast a fleeting glance at his speech notes, and injected more pomp into his address. "Friends, my dear colleagues, citizens entrust us with the most precious thing, their health. And our main task is to justify that trust. We have everything necessary to achieve this goal. After all, we are fortunate to work in this wonderful complex, equipped with state-of-the-art technology and comfortable conditions for our patients. A soft rustling of whispers spread through the room among those who couldn't contain their emotions. Manolo Torres, who had struggled to find a suitable seat before the meeting started and ended up sitting next to Inocencio, also whispered in a half voice. He's really on fire today, even barely looking at his notes. Julio is clearly in his element. I guess we'll have to hear him speaking for about an hour and a half. With a sense of longing, Inocencio looked at his neighbor and let out a heavy sigh. He was not in the mood for congratulations and festive fanfare, as he had 2 scheduled surgeries on his agenda for the day. His feelings weren't joyful at all. After a brief hesitation, he decided to share his thoughts with his colleague. Manolo, imagine, I actually came in an hour early today, but I couldn't even finish my rounds. And it's Friday, it's surgery day for me. Of course, Medical Workers' Day is a good reason for everyone to gather. But what's the point of all this chatter? Imitating Julio with a touch of drama, Manolo whispered back. You don't understand, Inocencio. Without these regular meetings, our hospital will crumble, and who knows, a flood might even begin. Manolo's intonation and the expression on his face made Inocencio smile. Forgetting caution, he quietly remarked, Manolo, good job. You should consider becoming a comedian. Laughter echoed from all sides, and Manolo playfully embraced the idea. Inocencio, I'll definitely consider your offer when they kick me out of here. People nearby reacted to the young surgeon's remark with laughter, and Julio looked annoyingly from the podium right into the heart of the amusement. Unfortunately, not everyone in this room realizes the importance of the moment. Some find it quite amusing. And I want to say that we don't have those who treat their work as just a means to earn money for a piece of bread. The chief doctor had no idea that this statement would awaken the dormant talents of comedy in the room. Some medical workers, ignoring the gravity of the situation, shifted from whispers to higher-pitched conversations, playfully suggesting gastronomic delights instead of a piece of bread. A piece of bread is good with caviar and butter. Occasionally, treating oneself to oysters is also an option. And with bread. No, bluefin tuna and sauce with white truffles is better. And you can have some strong beverage with a crust of bread. Someone in the front row took the relay. Frog legs à la Française. Frittata with lobster. Childish enthusiasm swept through the audience, while the chief doctor sweated in unsuccessful attempts to regain the audience's attention. Friends, colleagues, come on, we can't treat our common cause like this. We still have the semi-annual report planned, and then the concert, specially prepared by our cultural workers for the holiday. Perhaps the final argument brought the audience to their senses, and the hall calmed down a bit. However, the chief doctor decided not to leave unnoticed the disturbing fact of discipline violation that nearly ruined his speech. On this eve of the holiday, with deep regret, I must point out that there are still individuals among us who stir up the minds of those around them. Manolo widened his eyes. Our Julio has really gone off track. Stir up the minds, what an astonishing turn of phrase. I would have never thought to combine these 2 words. A so-called expert from the back row whispered. When it comes to such creative word combinations, it means our chief is running out of steam. He's going to read the list of best staff, hand out awards to the deputies, and not forget about himself. In other words, business as usual. People didn't have to come. Inocencio and Manolo supported the speaker of this remark, and when the ceremonial part was over and they announced a break, they were the first to rush toward the exit. The head of the HR department stood guard by the doors. She had received orders from above to detain those who were avoiding being a part of the collective. Since physical methods were completely out of the question, the woman shouted, "Everyone, stay in the hall. Anyone who leaves the concert won't receive their awards." The crowd pulled back, only the young surgeons confidently bypassed the HR person, who shouted after them in offense. "Do you need to have a special invitation? Or do you not need money? Inocencio turned around. Don't shout at me, this isn't a marketplace. Patients are waiting for me. Manolo followed, muttering. Goodness, bureaucracy is getting on my nerves. Time goes on, yet the bureaucratic guard only strengthens. Manolo mimicked the head of the HR department. If you don't stay for the concert, we'll deprive you of the awards. Go ahead, enjoy yourselves. Manolo's impromptu succeeded, and Inocencio laughed heartily. Thanks, colleague. These are the first positive emotions I've had all day. You definitely have a hidden talent, and I genuinely regret that it goes unnoticed. The men bid farewell by the elevator, solidifying their budding alliance with a firm handshake. Just a few minutes later, Inocencio was fully immersed in the whirlwind of daily routine and completely forgot about the 5-minute briefings and the upcoming professional holiday. However, in the evening, when he could barely lift his feet as he was too exhausted, he encountered Manolo again in the ground floor lobby. Manolo was talking to an unfamiliar old man and was pleased to see Inocencio. Inocencio, I'm not usually a fatalist, but I'm convinced that our second meeting within a single day is not a coincidence. After a strenuous day, the desire to relax a bit was strong, and Inocencio suggested, I think so too. Therefore, Manolo, we need to relieve stress urgently. It goes against all the laws for two objects to converge in the same point twice in a short period. Manolo laughed. Well, essentially, we've been in this same point practically all day, so I don't find anything surprising. You know, I often catch myself thinking that the operating room is a sort of space capsule. Surgeons frequently don't leave this enclosed space for days. I like your concept. It's very innovative and in line with the times. Manolo winked slyly. In that case, how about we find a place to sit? How's your schedule looking? Or is your spouse against mail company? Inocencio noted with irony. I don't have a spouse or any other commitments, so I'd be happy to accept your offer, especially since a professional holiday is coming up. Then I'll take you, Inocencio, to my favorite restaurant. It's modest, but the cuisine is excellent. I'm at your disposal. On the way to the restaurant with the romantic name Blues, the men found a common topic of conversation. However, they weren't discussing the current situation at the hospital. Instead, they were reminiscing about their alma mater and carefree college days. Throughout his 30-plus years, Inocencio had often found himself in situations where the other person took advantage of his attention. However, his father had told him in his youth, Son, a smart person is always able to listen even to a fool. Manolo didn't fit this definition at all, even though from the very first moments of their private conversation, he bombarded Inocencio with all sorts of information. Inocencio had to politely nod or occasionally shake his head for variety. But there was a pleasant aspect to their conversation. Manolo spoke with meaning and clarity. Inocencio, you have no idea that you've stepped into a real snake pit. Only from the outside does our hospital look like a model healthcare institution. In reality, passions sometimes flare up here so much that it's unbelievable. To keep the conversation going, Inocencio weakly remarked, This isn't unique to district hospitals. After college, I worked for almost 10 years, first at a diagnostic center and then at a regional surgery department. And believe me, they're ready to set up or devour each other there as well. Manolo poured some wine into their glasses. You're lucky. I ended up here straight away. I knew what profession I wanted back in school, and my mother was working in the city administration at the time. She put all her efforts into making her little son, that's me, happy. Thanks to her diligence and connections, I got a targeted admission and a budget slot. I admit, I was over the moon then with my luck and didn't suspect that this shiny metal had a reverse side made of cast iron. In short, I realized I had fallen into a trap only when it came to distribution. I was supposed to return to the village and work on improving healthcare there. But I had entirely different plans for my life. Inocencio hastened to reassure his friend. You shouldn't be so negative. A hospital is an excellent place for practice. Manolo interrupted the conversation. It's somewhat bearable now, but 8 years ago, it was a quiet horror. The situation was even worse in rural medical facilities. You see, my mother got me a ticket through a village official's connections. I didn't know life had treated you like that. Indeed. When I arrived at the outpatient clinic, I was utterly shocked. The building housed several departments and a polyclinic, but there were catastrophically not enough beds for seriously ill patients, and complex surgeries had to be performed almost under field conditions. In the first 2 years, I couldn't get my bearings at all. You won't believe it, but I wanted to run away anywhere, even to the North Pole, just to avoid going to work. A shadow of unpleasant memories briefly crossed Inocencio's face, but a second later, Manolo was already smiling. Perhaps, someday, I would have run away if it weren't for love. Such things are described in novels. Remember, like in that poem? Manolo suddenly jumped up, almost lost his balance, but quickly regained his stability. He elegantly spread his arms to the sides and recited. And every evening at the appointed hour, a maiden's silhouette moves in a misty window, wrapped in silk. The surgeon's brief performance caught the attention of the restaurant's patrons. Manolo acknowledged the enthusiastic applause as any artist would, with a bow. Once again, Inocencio was amazed by his colleague's acting abilities. He really wanted to tell Manolo that he had clearly chosen the wrong profession, but he remained silent due to the second rule from his father's code. This rule stated that not everything that comes to mind should be said aloud. Inocencio also applauded the medical worker. Bravo, Manolo. You managed to capture the mood the great poet wanted to convey. It was clear flattery, but Manolo accepted this complimentary gesture matter-of-factly. Although you're overestimating my abilities, thank you. He refilled their glasses. Forgive me, but at this point, I have a traditional toast to the ladies. Manolo raised his glass, and Inocencio followed suit. Can I ask a personal question? Go ahead. Manolo suddenly burst into laughter. Oh man, how these conventions are deeply ingrained in us. We agreed to ditch the formality, yet we're still using formal address. Anyway, Inocencio, go ahead with your question, don't hold back, and I'll answer as sincerely as I can. Inocencio agreed. I still don't quite understand how you ended up in our hospital. Honestly, your story intrigued me. It's all shrouded in mystery. Manolo stopped smiling. There's no mystery. All the turbulence was my mom's doing. One day, she came and saw the conditions her son was forced to work in, and she pulled me out of that pit. And the stranger? Which one? Well, the one from the poem. Manolo continued to wield his knife and fork because after his vivid performance and a glass of wine, his beastly appetite had awakened. I told you, it was like a novel. We met at first, then a few months of passionate infatuation followed. But then it turned out that each of us had a different picture of what was happening, and that had nothing to do with reality. Long story short, we broke up without any claims. That's a pity. I'm immune to sentimentality. Although you hit the nail on the head, because this story did indeed end sadly. My love went in an unknown direction, and it seems she even got married, and then... Manolo rolled his eyes toward the ceiling, and Inocencio asked with concern. Did something unpleasant happen to her? You could say that. My first love left this world young and beautiful. An electric shock ran through Inocencio's body. This reaction didn't escape Manolo's gaze. Did a similar tragedy occur in your life? Manolo asked this question without any signs of sympathy. In fact, his voice carried a sense of satisfaction. Inocencio didn't want to continue the conversation any longer and hurried back home, blurting out the first thing that came to mind. Sorry, I have a scheduled call with my parents. They always call me on Fridays. Manolo was disappointed. That's how it always goes. Just when you find common ground with someone, circumstances intervene. I won't hold you up. As if justifying his sudden departure, Inocencio awkwardly added, We'll have more time to talk later. Of course. You go ahead, and I'll linger a bit longer. Then I'll also head home to my wife and kids. After that failed romance, I didn't grieve in solitude for long. I got married soon after. Now I'm a respectable family man and the father of 2 rascals. My daughter will go to school in the fall. From Manolo's tone, it was easy to tell that he cherished his family. Inocencio left the restaurant, feeling a burning envy. Thoughts bounced around in his head, crowding out any ability to focus on just one thing. The discomfort was so intense that Inocencio muttered to himself, "You need some fresh air. It will help calm your nerves." Too many emotions in one day. Even back in college, Inocencio often resorted to this tried-and-true method of self-training. His father had recommended this approach to him. It was pleasant to feel the coolness of the evening on the body. Inocencio strolled down the city's main street at an unhurried pace, observing the passers-by. Not far from the city park, he noticed an 11-year-old girl and instinctively looked at his watch. I wonder what a child is doing alone at this late hour. But before Inocencio could think about the parents' negligence, a young woman hurried toward the girl and began speaking animatedly. The girl nodded, and her 2 braids bounced amusingly. Inocencio thought that the mother was scolding her daughter for some misconduct. Soon, both of them headed in the opposite direction. He watched them with a lingering, melancholic gaze. I could have had a daughter of about the same age, if only. He didn't want to dwell on the tragedy that shattered his life many years ago. For a while, that girl stayed on his mind. Although he didn't get a good look at her, he did notice how the mother snatched the flower basket from her daughter's hands. So, preoccupied with gloomy thoughts, Inocencio made his way to the temporary shelter he called home. But there was a ringing silence. The sensation was so unpleasant that it reminded him of a close encounter with a jellyfish. It happened in his distant childhood, when Inocencio hadn't yet started school. His parents had decided to invigorate their son before the start of his demanding school life. A trip to the seaside had exhausted the boy, and his father promptly decided to take a swim. Inocencio protested, but the head of the family was adamant. "Son, just take a dip in the water, it'll dispel your blues." But that first swim brought not just disappointment, but also horror. No sooner had Inocencio stepped away from the shore than something sticky and repulsive brushed against his legs. With a cry, he jumped out of the water and dashed along the beach. His worried father chased after him. "Inocencio, those are jellyfish. Look how charming they are." A semi-transparent, shapeless mass adorned Inocencio's hand. A heart-wrenching scream erupted from the boy's chest as he stumbled, running even faster. It's unclear how the first encounter with the sea and its inhabitants would have ended if not for a chance witness to the chase. The man bore a striking resemblance to a cartoon captain. He blocked Inocencio's path and then lifted him up. The stranger looked at Inocencio with disapproval. "Man, are you completely crazy? Can you scare a kid like that?" The poor boy is trembling from terror. The father tried to justify his unworthy behavior. "I didn't think he'd react so strongly to the jellyfish. I wanted him to have more experiences. You should have prepared the boy in advance. I was scared of them too as a child. My brother scared me so much that my mother had to take me to the old woman to get rid of it." Of course, the fear subsided with age, but the unease remained. The memory of that long-ago incident brought a sad smile to Inocencio's face, and he climbed to his floor. The silence in the apartment was so thick and viscous that it reminded Inocencio of that unpleasant encounter with a jellyfish. To dispel this sensation, he turned on the lights in the living room and hallway. The local authorities had allocated a one-room apartment to Dr. Inocencio right after he arrived in the city. The keys to the accommodation were ceremoniously handed to him during a meeting, and Julio, as always, sparkled with wit. "Dear Inocencio, we hope you'll quickly integrate into our close-knit team, and our little town will become your home. It's quite symbolic that you'll be starting your new, happy life in your own apartment. And remember, there's room for expansion." It was a hint that the newly arrived doctor would get married and have children. However, over 2 years had passed, and there hadn't been any significant changes on the personal front for Inocencio. Besides the television, he had no one to talk to. With melancholy, he looked into the corner of the room, where there was a brand new plasma screen, and with a sigh, he pressed the button on the remote control. Immediately, a picture of someone else's life unfolded on the screen, and Inocencio muttered bitterly, "Hello, my friend. Looks like I'll have to spend another whole evening with you. And I have a suspicion that in a few more years, I'll completely lose my mind." The man settled on a worn-out couch he had bought for a song through an advertisement. He watched a detective TV series with little interest while the smiling Dr. Manolo appeared in his mind. Once again, Inocencio felt a pang of envy and muttered through his teeth, "Why is life structured in a way that some people are lucky while others have nothing but bad luck?" Memory served up another point from his father's life code: "Inocencio, never try to jump over yourself. It's like jumping from one pole to another. You should be content with what's bestowed upon you." But a wise person can stretch even a meager lot over several days, while a fool can blow through a whole supply in one go. In his childhood, Inocencio didn't understand his father's aphorisms. It was only in his teenage years that he managed to grasp their hidden meaning. And as the years went by, Inocencio began to notice one peculiarity: in tough moments, his memory would always provide him with the right hint. On this summer evening, as he was staring blankly at the TV, his father's voice guided him again, telling him that something needed to change urgently. Relatives and close friends often teased Valerio. "Valerio, you're a strange guy, always trying to map out life down to the smallest detail. Don't forget that there's a thing called an unexpected factor. So, when this factor appears at your doorstep, no plans will help." Valerio staunchly defended his main life principle: everything should be in order. He'd debunk his opponent's theories with a single phrase: "A serious person won't be caught off guard by these unexpected factors because they're prepared for such moments. It's not like everything went smoothly for me from the beginning. There were times when things went awry, and I learned from those mistakes and made sure not to repeat them in the future. That's why I'm teaching my son from an early age to adhere to such a schedule." Valerio Gimenez led a challenging life. His mother became a widow early on and raised 3 boys on her own. Valerio was the oldest in the family, so he shouldered more responsibilities. He started working at the age of 14. During summer vacations, he wasn't lounging on the beach. Instead, he was unloading freight cars at the station. Valerio also tested his strength in a fast food restaurant, where he was hired as an assistant to the cook. After high school, a neighbor, out of pity, got him a job in a car repair shop, and then he went on to serve in the army. After his military service, he dreamed of studying to become a field medic, but he needed to help his mother and support his younger brothers. To be closer to his cherished dream, Valerio became an ambulance driver. There, he found his destiny in the form of Olivia, a cheerful young graduate from the medical school. A special bond formed immediately between the young paramedic and the driver. At first, it was mere fondness that developed into a strong friendship. Often, after their shifts, the 2 young people spent time together. They frequently assisted each other in life's challenges. However, their relationship never went beyond friendship. Once, Olivia didn't show up for her shift, and Valerio panicked. He started to find out the reason for his friend's absence. Since nobody really knew anything, he had to go to the supervisor. She looked at the guy over her glasses and mockingly said, "What's up, Valerio? Can't you take care of your partner?" At that moment, it felt like the ground was swaying beneath him. What's wrong with Olivia? Did something terrible happen to her? The supervisor realized she had gone a bit too far with the mystery and quickly reassured the valuable employee. "Valerio, don't worry so much, you've turned pale. She broke her leg, was doing some repairs at home, and fell from a height. In other words, it's a domestic injury." The young man let out a sigh of relief. "Oh, my God, she's such a risk taker, always getting into trouble. I've told her so many times to be more careful, but she just jokes around." The supervisor remarked. You should take action, not just talk. A real man is the one who sees a woman and then proposes marriage. We've been watching you, and we're eager to party at your wedding. Valerio's face turned red, and he quickly left the supervisor's office. On that day, he couldn't wait for his shift to end. After work, he rushed home to his girlfriend, making sure to pick up a bouquet of flowers along the way. The girl was pleased by his visit. Valerio, I knew you'd come. It's so boring to sit at home alone and hobble around on crutches. With a smirk, she glanced at the crutches and only then noticed the bouquet in Valerio's hands. Oh, Valerio, you brought flowers. I wonder how to interpret this. As a sign of respect or... Valerio was never impulsive, but some kind of excitement stirred within him, and he blurted out. Olivia, maybe it's time for us to stop beating around the bush. The whole station is watching us, and we're behaving like teenagers. Maybe it's time for us to make a decision about us? The girl, very calmly, as if she had been anticipating this conversation for a long time, replied. Valerio, you picked a somewhat inappropriate moment, but I'm glad you found the strength to say these words to me. I thought I'd never hear them, that you'd keep going in circles around me for another 5 years. The guy was shocked. Why didn't you say anything? Unfortunately, making the first confession is a man's prerogative, so poor and unfortunate women have to wait for you to mature. After their wedding, the Gimenez couple became known as the family team. As an addition to the small team, a nurse named Nora started working with them. She was a graduate of the same college that Olivia attended. The team worked together for almost 15 years, after which Nora transferred to the infectious diseases department. During rare moments of rest, the friends liked to talk about life. Valerio was always the initiator of such conversations. Nora, you have a growing daughter, and we have a son. You've probably thought about Laura's future, haven't you? Nora always answered evasively, but only once did she admit. I feel like it's a pointless endeavor. Of course, like any mother, I want everything to go well for my child, but let her choose her own path. As these words contradicted Valerio's principles, he started to persuade Nora. That's not the way to do it. A person at such a young age isn't capable of calculating everything. I know from my own experience that at 17, the world looks rosy, so parents' task is to help the child, protect them from mistakes. Olivia, who had been silent until then, interrupted her husband. Valerio, why are you imposing your creed on someone else's monastery? Nora, you see, he's convinced that our Inocencio simply has to become a doctor. This desire has turned into an obsession. The man didn't give up. But I'm not imposing my understanding on our son. I'm just trying to tune him to the right frequency, and I don't see anything wrong with that approach. After all, I wanted to dedicate my life to medicine myself, wanted to save people. In my opinion, you have achieved your goal. You're saving lives every day along with us. No, Olivia, it's not quite what I dreamed of. I'm just a driver, not a doctor. You also haven't reached the desired level. So, I'm inspiring our son to improve our results. Nora marveled. Valerio, you're definitely right about something. I wonder how your son perceives this, well, let's put it gently, mentoring attitude. Olivia spoke for her husband. Inocencio is obsessed with medicine. He's already thoroughly studied human anatomy, borrowed books from the library. In short, he's preparing for entering the university. Indeed, Inocencio had been systematically working towards his ultimate life goal since the high school. He attended optional biology classes and took part in themed competitions. In his school report card, there were only 2 A's, so he was admitted to medical university on his first try. Well-absorbed rules from his father's school prevented him from relaxing. His classmates openly teased him. Inocencio, you'll grow old without even tasting life. Just once, drop everything and party to the fullest. Only once did Inocencio deviate from his principles and decided to let loose completely. It happened around New Year's. For almost a week, The guys had been partying at the village of one of the students' parents. Of course, there were strong drinks and there were girls. But after the holidays, Inocencio had been feeling unwell for over a week. Even years later, he remembered that party and its consequences with shame. The outcome of the fun was a steady debts and problems in the dean's office. But the most surprising thing was that Inocencio's father learned about his exploits and personally came to the university. Valerio didn't hold back in his expressions and openly conducted some educational work with his son. "What have you done? Do you want to get kicked out of university? Your mother and I put so much effort into getting you educated, making you a responsible person, and you're out partying. If something like this happens again, I won't care that you're an adult, I'll use my belt on you." To emphasize his point, Valerio started unbuckling his belt. Inocencio was frightened. "Dad, what are you doing? People will laugh at me." Valerio waved his hand. "You've become an object of mockery all on your own. Gossips of your adventures has reached our town. I told you everything, now think about it." The father was highly displeased with his son and immediately went to the train station. Inocencio wanted to accompany him, but Valerio grumbled dissatisfiedly. "I don't need an escort, I can still walk on my own." Valerio headed towards the exit but unexpectedly turned back. He looked into his son's eyes as if trying to peer into his soul. "Inocencio, you have no idea how disappointed your mother is. Rumors about you are already circulating in town, I won't tell them to you. Acquaintances are whispering behind her back. Please, have some compassion for her. And in general, before doing anything, think about your loved ones. Unfortunately, we rarely consider that our actions can hurt our close ones." The father left, and his last words echoed in Inocencio's mind for a long time. During the night, his father appeared in his dreams, and through the dream, Dr. Gimenez thought he should call his parents in the morning. This was his last conscious thought before he sank into an uneasy sleep involving the chief doctor, Dr. Torres, and an unfamiliar girl he had met near the park. Holidays in the lives of professionals only bring pleasant changes for a short time. Most often, they pass without significant consequences. Interestingly, it's the medical professionals who pay the least attention to such dates. Within a week, even the day of the medical worker was forgotten along with the impassioned speech of the chief doctor. However, a pleasant moment still remained. Despite the threats from the HR department head, all employees received bonuses, including those who demonstrated discipline. The monetary reward was issued after the holiday. Before lunch, Palancha Ortiz, the senior nurse of general surgery, burst into the resident's office. "Hurry to the accounting department, they're giving out awards to everyone." Inocencio was surprised. "What awards?" The senior nurse exclaimed in dismay. "What? The one they promised." Money hadn't been credited yet, only today it arrived. "Why not on a card?" "Inocencio, you are never satisfied. If they're giving it in cash, then that's how it should be." "What kind of people?" "They're given something good, and they turn their noses up." For Palancha, there were no ranks or positions. She could argue with the department head and the chief doctor alike. Inocencio glanced at Olia Velasco, who, without looking up, was immersed in the medical histories of her patients at the neighboring table. "How are you doing, Olia?" The woman, still focused on her work, replied. "Just fine. Go without me, Inocencio, I need to finish this. I'm buried in these papers, and I have a shift today. I'll get the award later. But in any case, a spoon is precious at lunchtime, and retrospectives aren't interesting. I disagree with you because receiving money is always pleasant. For many, payday turns into a real holiday." Olia looked at the young doctor in surprise. "Inocencio, I'll never believe that you belong to that category of people. You're so responsible." Inocencio understood that Olia, who was temporarily acting as the department head, had misunderstood his statement. He laughed heartily. "Did you really think that in my free time? Oh no. I'm not into that stuff. and I don't have any bad habits either. You could say I'm the perfect husband material. And you, colleague, won't die of modesty. But really, I definitely wouldn't be suitable for the position of your bride. 20 years ago, maybe, a dreamy smile froze on the face of this charming woman. Inocencio unintentionally started admiring her. But Olia quickly brought him back to reality. Inocencio, go get your work award, just don't take too long. A familiar figure was standing alone by the elevator, and Inocencio quickened his pace. Manolo, wait for me. Manolo turned around. Oh, Inocencio, I'm delighted, truly delighted to see you. Astonishing things are happening in this world. Once again, we've crossed paths at this spot. Inocencio played along with his colleague. You can't change the meeting place. Are you also heading to the accounting department? Yes, at least one pleasant moment in this day. The elevator almost silently stopped, and the two men entered the cabin. Inocencio noticed that Manolo was in a bad mood. He politely asked, "Is something bothering you? You're not yourself today." Manolo let out a heavy sigh. Cases come in all shapes and sizes. Some are more like disasters. That's exactly the kind of natural disaster that hit our department. Manolo grimaced as if he was in tooth pain. Just please, don't ask about anything right now. We'll discuss it later, if, of course, you are interested. We work together, and of course, I care about troubles of my colleagues. Manolo weakly smiled. Thank you. The elevator stopped on the first floor, where hospital employees who had managed to receive their bonuses were eagerly waiting. They flooded into the elevator cabin, so the surgeons had to squeeze their way out. People, let us out, Manolo muttered under his breath. Pushing like devils. There are rules, after all. Inocencio cheerfully remarked. Manolo, don't pay attention to such trifles. You're just not in the mood today, so other people's cheerfulness irritates you. As a doctor, I declare the situation critical and in need of urgent action. In short, you need to lighten your soul, and I'm ready to listen. Manolo patted Inocencio on the shoulder. You know what, Inocencio, the atmosphere isn't exactly favorable right now, and we don't have time for a chat. Let's meet after work. Inocencio was pleased. With great pleasure. I liked that little restaurant you took me to last Friday. All right then, we'll have dinner there tonight. Inocencio never rushed events, but after meeting with Manolo, he kept glancing at his watch constantly. Olia was observant and noticed it. Inocencio, are you in a hurry for a date? You're almost right. Have you already found a life partner so quickly? Oh, Olia, if that had happened, you can't imagine how happy I would be. But instead of a lovely stranger on my way to the accounting department, I ran into a friend, and we decided to have dinner together at a wonderful little restaurant. By the way, I recommend it. The place has a romantic name, Blues, and the food is excellent. The department head looked at the surgeon suspiciously. Just make sure you don't overdrink. I know these friendly meetings. My husband drinks brine or kefir after such events. I tell him it's time to calm down, and he says to me, Olia, you don't understand anything about male company. Olia, your husband is right, because such gatherings bond people and, well. The department head didn't agree on this. Oh, that male solidarity. Don't forget you have duty tomorrow. And also, as friendly advice, I want to tell you not to trust unfamiliar people too much. Inocencio barely held back his laughter. Olia, right now you sound just like my mom. She tried to protect me from dangerous acquaintances in my youth. The woman wasn't even fazed. Consider that at the moment, I'm not just filling in for the department head, but also for your mom. So, I want to warn you that Manolo isn't who he pretends to be. People call such individuals dark horses. An involuntary exclamation escaped Inocencio. But, Olia. Don't interrupt me, young man, I know what you're thinking right now. But I'm not a gossip and I don't believe in rumors. I have personal experience dealing with this person. And, I'll be honest with you, he's not very pleasant. I mean, from experience. I won't go into details, I'll just say one thing. Manolo is one of those for whom personal interests come first. He'll throw you under the bus at any moment. And as a professional, he's not that great either. But then why is he still here, let alone in a position of authority? Olia smirked. It's simply that Manolo has connections. You're still new here and don't know that the urology department was opened just to introduce a new managerial position. By the way, that's the reason we have a constant shortage of beds. But eventually, everything will come to light. Julio will leave, and this game will be over. Inocencio respected Olia and had no doubt about the truth of her words. After that conversation, he immersed in his thoughts, but he didn't want to cancel his meeting with Manolo. I'll try to figure out what kind of person he is on my own. I've never been wrong about people. Could I have made a mistake this time? The answer to this question required time, and Inocencio decided not to rush things. Exactly at 5, he left the department. Since he didn't see the familiar figure around the main entrance, Inocencio decided to wait for his friend in a small square near the hospital. A light drizzle was falling, so he had to use an umbrella. To his surprise, he found that he wasn't alone there. A girl was sitting on a park bench, with a small basket of flowers beside her. Inocencio approached the young flower seller and immediately recognized her as the same girl he had seen in the city park a week ago. "Hello, sweetie." The girl looked at him warily. "Hello. Why are you sitting here alone in such weather?" "I just do, that's all." From the tone of the girl's voice, it wasn't hard to guess that she was uncomfortable with a stranger's questions. She hid her scared eyes from him, and then turned away altogether, pretending she had nothing to do with him. Inocencio sat down on the wet bench. "Tell me, if it's not a secret, who did you bring flowers for?" The girl stared at him. "For no one, just like that. People go to the hospital to visit someone, and some need flowers. So, are you giving flowers as gifts or selling them?" The girl became visibly annoyed. "I'm still little, and little ones aren't allowed to sell things." Inocencio said as amicably as possible. "All right, let's bend the rules a bit. Give me the flowers, and I'll give you some money for ice cream. You can think of it as me treating you." He chose 5 vibrant daisies from the bunch and handed the girl a few coins. She immediately smiled. "Thank you, mister. If you like daisies, I can bring them here." Although Inocencio was completely indifferent to flowers, he said, "Sure. Just tell me, where's your mom?" "I don't have a mom, I live with Franca. She's my aunt, but she's like a mom to me." "And does your aunt let you sell flowers?" 2 blue eyes briefly looked at Inocencio's face. "What are you saying?" "Franca doesn't know. She sells them herself when she's at home. But right now, she's at work. She has 2 jobs because we need a lot of money. And you want to help her?" The girl lowered her head but didn't answer. Manolo appeared on the path. "Inocencio, there you are. I've been looking for you. I was waiting by the elevator at first, and then the girls at the information desk told me you had already left. And what are you doing here all alone, in the rain? Probably lost in thought?" Inocencio thought to himself, well, Manolo's mood seems to have improved significantly. But he said aloud, "You're mistaken. I was just having a conversation with a very nice being." Inocencio began to look around in confusion. "She was here, but she disappeared somewhere." Manolo said meaningfully, "Oh, so you've met your mystery lady in this cozy little park?" "No, it was just a little girl, about 10 years old, maybe a bit older. She had a basket of flowers with her. But as soon as you showed up, she vanished as if she melted into thin air." Manolo waved his index finger. "Just don't think anything bad about me. I'm not a villain, and I have nothing to do with the disappearance of the little girl." Manolo was in a fairly positive mood, so Inocencio asked, "You're joking, and that's a good sign. Did your situation resolve itself successfully?" Manolo embraced him by the shoulders. "Not entirely, but there's Nora. By the way, there's something you can help me with." Inocencio didn't reply, but he remembered the warning from the head nurse. The two men walked to the restaurant in complete silence and took the same table they had sat at a week ago. Inocencio noticed, "It seems to me, Manolo, that a nice tradition is forming between us. If my wife finds out that I'm spending money aimlessly, she'll annihilate me, to put it mildly." Manolo laughed, though it seemed forced. Inocencio pretended not to notice. The restaurant had no other patrons at this hour, so the waiter swiftly brought their orders and wished them a pleasant meal. The men had declined alcohol in advance, but Manolo, as an insurance, asked, "Maybe we should have a few shots after all?" Inocencio crossed his arms over his chest. "Not for me. I have a 24-hour shift starting at 8 a.m. tomorrow, and you know very well that the weekends bring a high flow of cuts, fractures, and acute abdomens." "Exactly. To be honest, during those shifts, you're always expecting some troublemaker who could ruin all your prospects." In surprise, Inocencio raised his eyebrows. "Really? I never thought on such a grand scale. Both my parents, who worked in medicine for almost 40 years, constantly told me that the most important thing is saving a person's life. It doesn't matter who that person is, an official or a homeless person living in a landfill. You're quite the altruist, Inocencio. Admirable. But I have a somewhat different approach. I always consider events or facts from multiple perspectives. If I understood you correctly, personal things matter more to you?" "Not more, but it matters. And I don't see anything wrong with that." Like last time, Inocencio lost his appetite. "Manolo, you promised to tell me about the difficulties in your department." For a moment, a grimace of displeasure appeared on Manolo's face, but he quickly put on a forced smile. "Yes, of course. That's why we decided to meet again. By the way, we're back to the formal tone." Inocencio ignored this comment and followed Manolo's lead in changing the topic of conversation. "How long have you been heading the department?" Manolo's expression transformed into a lively mask again. "Not that long. I started as a regular resident, but that was in the old hospital. And when the new one opened, the higher authorities decided to allocate beds for urology, so I was appointed to this position. And now someone wants to change everything." Manolo's face twisted with anger. "I told you that this place is a real snake pit. Everyone is trying to devour whoever is more successful. I'm constantly being set up. And today they reported that they're planning to shut down the department. And the reason? They can't just close an entire department without cause. If there's a will, there's always a way to find justification. Julio said our statistics are lacking. We're not meeting the bed occupancy targets. It's all complete nonsense, not a medical institution." Inocencio waited for Manolo to vent his frustration. For about 2 minutes, Manolo huffed indignantly, then suddenly seemed to deflate. He looked imploringly at Inocencio. "A certain situation is shaping up. They're planning to merge us with the general surgery department, meaning with your department. Clearly, this raises the issue of leadership." Inocencio became cautious. "And?" With undisguised irritation, Manolo said. "Inocencio, what's up? You understand everything perfectly well. We'll have to choose between me and Olia, and a lot depends on you." Inocencio had never encountered such blatant audacity before, and for a moment he was left speechless in confusion. "So, you want me to support your candidacy?" "Of course, we're friends. And who is this Olia Velasco? Maybe she's a decent surgeon, but her age and outdated approach don't align with the times. I believe such a person shouldn't hold a leadership position. Don't you have any flaws yourself?" Inocencio posed this question with a touch of sarcasm, but Manolo didn't notice. He was carried away by his own enthusiasm. Professionally, of course, I have no flaws. I'm an experienced doctor. I've performed significant surgeries on my own, and my expertise has been acknowledged multiple times. Besides, it's too early for me to think about retirement. Manolo wanted to add something more, but he glanced at Inocencio and fell silent. Inocencio understood that his response was awaited. He decided not to mislead Manolo and spoke honestly. Manolo, I can't promise you anything right now because I despise backstage maneuvers. That's the first thing. And secondly, I disagree with you about age. I've always believed that a leadership position should be held by an experienced specialist with a solid work history. The candidate's authority also plays a significant role, and Olia Velasco is highly respected in our department. Inocencio, don't rush to conclusions. The waiter appeared and it made Manolo fall silent. He hurriedly took the bill and said, I'll pay. After all, this was my idea. Inocencio firmly stated, I'm used to paying for my own dinner. He counted the necessary amount and handed it to the waiter. As he walked towards the exit, he felt Manolo's unfriendly gaze on his back. With regret, Inocencio thought how deceptive a person's appearance can be sometimes. He seemed so pleasant, just an ordinary guy, yet harboring such intentions. Inocencio spent the evening in front of the TV again, and in the morning on Saturday, just before his shift, he decided to call his father. Dad, I need your advice. His father's confident voice immediately had a calming effect on him. His thoughts lined up neatly, and he felt more assured. The conversation was brief since Valerio didn't like to waste words. But after this session of communication, Inocencio felt a little calmer. Dr. Gimenez enjoyed walking. Despite most of his colleagues driving to work, he didn't abandon his habits. It was a 20-minute leisurely walk to the hospital, so he left early to have some spare time. After yesterday's rain, there was a freshness in the air, and the sun was doing its job diligently. The man didn't expect to encounter the flower girl again on this Saturday morning, but the little flower vendor was sitting on the same bench. He saw two women in hospital gowns leave her side. The doctor greeted the girl cheerfully. Hi. I didn't expect to see you here. The girl looked surprised. But I promised you yesterday that I would come. I always keep my promises. Well done. Tell me, at least, what's your name? We've known each other for 2 days already, and I don't know your name. I'm Katerina. And I know you. You're Dr. Gimenez. Inocencio was surprised. And who revealed my biggest secret to you? Katerina nodded towards the departing women. Those ladies over there said, Dr. Gimenez is coming, so he'll make the rounds. And do you visit your sick patients every day? I do. With sympathy, the girl asked. It must be tough, even worse than going to school, right? You're right. But life dictates that everyone has to fulfill their duties. I'm a doctor, and it's my responsibility to treat people. Do you cure everyone? I try, but it's not always possible, much to my regret. The girl looked at him with eyes full of pain. They didn't save my mom either. I don't know how it happened, Aunt Franca doesn't tell me anything. And quite rightly so. There are things that young children better not to know. The girl said dreamily. I wish I could grow up faster. Don't rush it, little one. Well, it's time for me to go. He had already turned around, but the girl's exclamation stopped him. And the flowers? I specifically chose larger ones for you. Franca says my mom also really loved daisies. I even have a photo of my mom in a field of daisies. It's so beautiful. A sudden sharp pain pierced the man's heart. He hastily picked up the bouquet of wildflowers and handed the girl a few bills. Thank you for the flowers, buy yourself some treats. Will you come tomorrow? He replied as he walked away. No, I won't have time tomorrow. Gimenez began his shift, but a vague sense of unease lingered with him throughout the day. Though contrary to his expectations, there were only a few incoming patients, mostly not in his specialty. This allowed him to contemplate everything in the quiet of the doctor's office. In all his years working in the hospital, Inocencio had never encountered such an inexplicable situation. Somehow, the underhanded games of Manolo and the girl had merged into one entity. This combination alarmed him because he couldn't discern its meaning. He thought, why did this strange girl appear precisely now? It's a small town, and I should have met her earlier. By the end of the day, he unexpectedly came to the conclusion that there was something about this girl, something elusive, that reminded him of his deceased fiancée. For years, he had vigorously pushed away memories of that tragedy, and until today, he had succeeded in doing so. After completing his studies, Inocencio Gimenez didn't have to search for his first job. Even during his final year, while doing his internship, he had made a good impression at the diagnostic center. The experienced specialists were impressed. This young man is a real find for us. He's sharp with the technology and quickly picks up useful information on the fly. Such reviews flattered Inocencio, and he became even more determined. As a result, he received an excellent evaluation for his internship, and a request was sent to the institute. The dean's office was surprised. Inocencio, you're definitely making progress. In my time, there were only a couple of cases where we received individual requests. How do you feel about working at the center? Inocencio, like a proper student, lowered his gaze modestly. I'm not against it, in principle, although I prefer hands-on practice. The dean chuckled. But what about diagnostics? Do they deal with dead people there? There are still very much alive people coming for examinations. I want to perform surgeries. Working with modern equipment is tempting, but you can't make up your mind. You want this and you want that. Come on, make a decision. People are waiting. As usual, Inocencio turned to his father for advice. Valerio said sternly, "Son, it's about time you learn to make responsible decisions on your own. What does your intuition tell you?" "That I should agree. Starting my practice at the diagnostic center is the best choice for now. And I don't want to let people down. The team there is great." "Well, there you have it. You've answered an important question yourself." In the center, Inocencio worked for a little over 3 years. He could work with complex equipment with his eyes closed and flawlessly interpret images. Rumors began circulating in the department that Inocencio was destined for a brilliant career. It was a period of growing. During this time, he began a romance with Laura. The girl with such a rare name worked at the cafe located on the first floor of the center. She stood at the counter, like a carnival barker, offering various dishes to visitors. Later, he noticed that she was clearly trying to catch his eye. He also started flirting with her. They spent several months like this, and one day the girl asked, "Doctor, are you always like this?" Inocencio pretended not to understand the question. "Like what?" "Well, like you're out of this world. The girl is making an effort, giving you signals, but you completely don't notice it. It's not even interesting." Inocencio Gimenez laughed. "It's not hard to guess that the girl suffering that I don't pay any attention is you." "Yeah, that's right. But I'm not suffering, because I'm naturally cheerful. My friends say I can cheer up the dead." Although the joke was not entirely appropriate considering the context, Inocencio smiled. "I wouldn't mind testing your abilities. What do you finish your work?" "At 6. "All right. I'll wait for you right here, at the entrance." Initially, Inocencio didn't think about getting into serious relationships with this carefree girl. Laura clearly wasn't aligned with his interests, and her way of speaking sometimes left him bewildered. Of course, he didn't mind female company, but he always limited himself to casual relationships, as his immediate plans didn't involve marriage. But fate seemed to play a trick on him, and he didn't even notice how Laura charmed him. Inocencio was drawn to this charming provincial girl as if she were a magnet. As much as he could with his modest salary, he bought gifts for her, and she didn't hesitate to share her desires with him. The bouquet and sweets period lasted only 2 weeks, and then it happened, something that all lovers eagerly anticipate. One day after an evening stroll, Laura, holding her breath, said, "Inocencio, I'm home alone today, completely alone. My roommate is on shift, she won't be back until 9 in the morning." The young man immediately understood the hint, and as a true gentleman, he couldn't refuse the lady. "Then let's go to your place." It was an extraordinary night. Although Inocencio had been in close relationships with girls and women before, he had never experienced such overwhelming feelings. When the time came to part, he couldn't tear himself away from his beloved. Inocencio whispered, "You're amazing. I've never met a girl like you before. Inocencio, I've also always dreamed of a guy like you." After that night, he took a long time to recover. Somewhere near his temple, the thought pulsed, "Inocencio, it seems like you're head over heels in love." At that time, he didn't question how or why Laura ended up in the town. He knew nothing about this girl at all. A little later, she confessed to him that right after finishing school, she had a romance with a guy from their town, but he left her. Laura told this touching story with tears in her eyes. "Can you imagine, Inocencio? I believed him, but he just took advantage of my vulnerability. Because of him, I haven't finished my studies." Inocencio was very surprised. "Did you really suffer so much that you couldn't gather the strength to at least enroll in college?" Looking straight into his eyes, Laura answered, "For about 3 years, I walked around in a fog, doing everything mechanically. My mother even took me to see a psychotherapist." "Don't your hospital have such a specialist?" "Oh, Inocencio, in our town, the hospital is such a place that it's terrifying to go there." "You mean hopeless?" "Kind of." "So, you went to the big city in search of a happy life?" This question unexpectedly triggered aggression in the girl. Why does everyone assume that just because a girl is from the provinces, she must be here to find a wealthy sugar daddy? I have completely different plans, and old men aren't my type at all. Besides, money isn't the most important thing to me. Then tell me, what do you value most in men? Without hesitation, the girl blurted out, "Integrity. I saw through you immediately. The moment I saw you for the first time in our cafeteria, I knew you wouldn't stoop to trivialities." "Well, you're not wrong. My father taught me that every woman, regardless of age or status, deserves respect. In short, I was raised in a conservative manner." Laura looked at him with enthusiasm. "That's great." Inocencio enjoyed both the look Laura gave him and her admiring sighs. He pulled her closer. "Laura, I haven't done this for anyone before, you're the first. Let's go visit my parents for the weekend. I want to introduce you to them." The girl suddenly pulled away from his embrace. "I think you're rushing things. I'm nobody to you. How will you introduce me?" Inocencio understood that Laura expected a more serious step from him, one he couldn't decide on just yet. Only at the end of August did he finally propose to her when she confessed with embarrassment. "Inocencio, I'm not entirely sure yet, but maybe we'll have a little one soon." She looked at him expectantly, and he didn't answer immediately. "Well then, we need to get married quickly." Laura smiled. "Wait, just get married? What about the wedding?" "Every girl dreams of that day." Her eyes sparkled suspiciously, and Inocencio tried to reassure her. "You shouldn't be upset. All right, I'll take out a loan, my parents will help, and we'll have a real wedding." Laura jumped up with joy. The whole evening she came up with various ideas for the wedding celebration. Before going to bed, she unexpectedly asked, "Will we have a honeymoon?" Inocencio wasn't prepared for that question and decided not to mince words. "Sweetheart, I don't earn enough for both a wedding and a vacation, so choose one. In my opinion, the most practical option is to get married and then go to the south. My ancestors' favorite vacation spot is Cyprus. Have you been there?" Laura became flustered, her eyes started running around. No, never. I prefer turkey more. Inocencio thought to himself, it seems like my little one has an unhealthy appetite awakening. But he didn't voice this thought. Instead, he promised her, all right, we'll figure something out. First, we'll submit the application, then we'll find the travel packages. I have my vacation scheduled for September. Laura clapped her hands joyfully. Imagine, I have one then too. What a lucky coincidence. For several days, the phrase "what a lucky coincidence" echoed in the young doctor's mind. Luck accompanied the young couple. Through a friend, Inocencio managed to get 2 last-minute vacation packages at a discount. During the first few days, Laura pouted her lips, expressing her dissatisfaction. I thought that as a last resort, we'd go to Turkey. Cyprus doesn't really impress me. Besides, a woman I know, who works as a cook for us, said it's a mess over there. Inocencio was growing tired of his future wife's perpetual discontent, so he decided to deflate her arrogance a bit. Laura, you should listen to your own judgment more and your acquaintances less. Everyone has their own perception of service quality. Maybe your cook friend had a bad experience in Cyprus, that's why she's upset. Another drawback was that the travel dates didn't align with the scheduled wedding date. It turned out that the couple would have to go on vacation first and then formalize their relationship. But this circumstance didn't bother Laura at all. It seems like a minor thing to me. On the contrary, it's even quite intriguing. We'll arrive together, and the next day we'll go to the church. The girl quickly came to terms with the limited format of the celebration, especially since she later revealed that she had a very small circle of relatives and acquaintances. However, there was one issue that concerned Inocencio. The bride didn't want him to meet her family before the wedding. It seemed like she was simply embarrassed by her mother and sister. A couple of times, he spoke to her mother on the phone, but he wouldn't call it a proper meeting. The vacation was coming to an end when Laura decided to go on a boat ride with some neighbors. Inocencio wasn't fond of that type of activity, so he declined right away. You go ahead, I'll relax here a bit. I'm feeling quite sleepy today. It seemed like Laura was actually pleased. Right, take a rest, and I'll have a little fun. After all, married life will start soon, and you'll be keeping an eye on every step I take. Go, have fun. Just be careful and don't be a hero. Don't forget about your delicate condition. The girl pursed her lips. Inocencio, I'm expecting some kisses when I get back. He kissed his fiancée tightly and flopped onto the bed. He didn't keep track of time, so it's hard to say how much time passed after the group of young people, including Laura, left. Inocencio woke up because he heard the screams of terror. They were coming from both outside on the street and inside the hotel, but it wasn't clear what had caused such a commotion. Inocencio rushed out to the veranda and cheerfully asked, Hey, what's all the noise about? A teenager standing on the terrace below explained briefly. The boat flipped over. Everyone managed to get out except one girl who couldn't swim at all. Lifeguards are saving her. Inocencio didn't wait to hear the rest and shot off the spot. His mind was clouded, and his thoughts stumbled, mixed with horrifying images. A crowd had gathered on the beach, but he darted through it. Laura? Where's my fiancé? He probably looked like a madman because people immediately parted as he approached. Laura was lying on the sand, and lifeguards were trying to revive her. Inocencio roughly pushed one of them away. I'm a doctor, let me through. The lifeguard looked at him sadly. Dude, it's too late. We've been trying for 15 minutes, but it's all in vain. What happened next, Inocencio remembered vaguely. He clung to the girl's body, shaking it. Laura, wake up, this wasn't supposed to happen. But a faint smile was forever frozen on the girl's lifeless face. Laura's mother arrived by her daughter's body, but she didn't even want to talk to the would-be son-in-law, considering him responsible for the girl's death. Before leaving, the woman decided to voice everything she thought. Don't ever show your face in our town. If you do, you won't get away with it. Let them put you in jail, I don't care anymore. Only 3 months later, Inocencio obtained a copy of the death certificate for his fiancée through an acquaintance. But there was no mention of Laura's pregnancy in the medical document. He felt uncomfortable realizing that his fiancée had deceived him before her tragic death. This fact inflicted incredible pain and torment upon the young man. He could no longer work at the diagnostic center and transferred to the regional hospital immediately after his vacation. The tragedy in his personal life had a lasting impact on the young surgeon's fate. For the first 2 years, he avoided any relationships with women. But gradually, the pain dulled, and Inocencio returned to a normal life. Valerio played a significant role in this process. Son, life goes on, and you shouldn't shut yourself off. Your mother and I respect your feelings, but there are many wonderful women besides Laura. You need a family. Living alone is difficult and joyless. Inocencio wanted to change something in his life, but he couldn't overcome himself. When he accidentally learned that a new hospital complex had opened in town, and he thought, "This is your chance." He hurried to the regional health department to express his desire to move to the provincial town. His initiative was appreciated there. "Thank you for your response. We don't even know how to solve the staffing crisis. The hospital is large, but there's a catastrophic shortage of personnel. So, your application will likely be approved." The next day, he received a call. "Inocencio, your request has been approved. When can you move to the town?" "Tomorrow, if possible. As soon as I receive my settlement, I'll leave immediately." And then a thought burned into his mind. It was the very town where his Laura lived. Up until this moment, the town's name had just seemed familiar and nothing more. Everything was unfamiliar in the new place. Local customs struck him especially. Everyone here knew everything about every person and could even list their relatives up to the 5th degree. The hospital itself also had some rather unusual practices. For instance, it was normal for doctors and junior medical staff to have a very informal relationship, to the extent that a janitor could openly reprimand a doctor. When Inocencio expressed his opinion about this during a break, Olio warned him, "Inocencio, don't even try to change anything, they simply won't understand you here. It's better to pretend like you don't notice anything." Inocencio thought about it and decided it was worth listening to the advice of the head nurse. Gradually, he adapted to life in the new environment. And after 2 years, he realized that the local customs no longer provoked the same annoyance and irritation they did in the first days. The chief doctor had also been observing the surgeon from the region all this time. In the town, all incoming specialists were held in high regard and respect. The locals, like Manolo, were treated quite differently. When a directive from above came to optimize the hospital, Julio and his 2 deputies spent several weeks brainstorming. The chief doctor suggested, "Guys, we need to find a solution with minimal losses. You understand that we can't afford to lose valuable personnel, so the most reasonable solution would be to merge 2 departments. As for my personal opinion, I would eliminate the urology department. The occupancy in that department is terrible, and we have to make up for it by admitting patients from other profiles, which ultimately affects the hospital's overall performance." After long discussions, everyone unanimously agreed on this option. They just needed to appoint the right head of the department. One of the deputies supported Olio Velasco's candidacy, while the other believed that Manolo Torres should take that position. "Friends, I think Manolo is better suited for this role. He's young, proactive. We need to create favorable conditions for people like him." The first deputy objected. "Initiative alone won't get you far. Olio has experience, and that's most important in our field." Julio listened to the disputants in silence. And when they grew tired of defending their viewpoints, he firmly said, "I believe Inocencio is well suited for the head position. He has good practice, worked in the diagnostic center, and then in the regional surgery department. Inocencio is a doctor of the modern format, and that's exactly what we need today. I believe that in the future, Inocencio could easily take my chair." This decision was unexpected, and the deputies exchanged glances. But what about Olia? What should we do about her? She'll become the deputy head doctor. I can confidently rely on her as an assistant. The chief doctor's decision meant that one of the deputies would go to the department or the outpatient clinic. However, it was still unknown who exactly would become the outsider. Thus, the staff decision-making process at the district hospital made Dr. Gimenez have some enemies. But Inocencio had no idea about it. On Monday morning, he arrived at work, and the head nurse informed him. "Go to the reception area, the chief wants to see you." Julio was on the phone with someone. He waved his hand at Inocencio, indicating that he should take a seat on the chair nearby. The chief put down the receiver and, without any introduction, which was unlike him, said, "You've probably heard about the turmoil in our hospital?" "Yeah, I've heard something in passing. I don't really have time to delve into rumors." Julio frowned. "You should. You always need to be aware of what's happening." Inocencio smiled. "All right, Julio, I'll make sure to improve. But I believe you didn't call me in just for that." "You guessed it, Inocencio. By orders from above, you're required to carry out an optimization." The chief stumbled over the complex word and cursed. "Damn it, they've come up with words that can break your tongue. To save you from being overwhelmed and not to waste your time, I'll just say that you might take on the head position after the urology department is merged with your department." Inocencio jumped up. "Julio, I don't want that. I feel more at home in the operating room. As far as I'm concerned, nothing is stopping you from pursuing that desire." "But what about Olia? She's been the head for so many years." "Olia will move to a higher managerial position, so you don't need to worry about her fate." Inocencio was about to present more arguments, but Julio grimaced. "That's it, Inocencio. The question of your appointment is nearly settled. We just have to wait for the approval of your candidacy. But I have no doubt that the answer will be positive." Inocencio left the chief's office and leaned against the wall. The secretary said with a cheerful voice, "Inocencio, congratulations on your appointment." He looked at the girl bewilderedly. "It's too early to celebrate. Maybe they won't approve me." "That's impossible. They'll definitely approve you. I can imagine how Manolo will be tearing his hair out." Inocencio smiled. "Vita, you're cruel, considering the unique features of Manolo's hairstyle." The girl giggled. "Oh, it's a riot. I can already picture that scene." Inocencio also imagined how Manolo would be searching for vegetation on his completely bald head, and his mood instantly improved. Returning to the department, he immediately had a conversation with Olia. "I'll be honest with you, I don't see myself in the role of the head." The senior nurse objected. "Inocencio, you're like a volcano right now, puffing with indignation. But don't waste your nerves unnecessarily, because your appointment was expected. Furthermore, I recommended you. Manolo isn't the right person for that role, and he's too ambitious." There wasn't time for debates, as patients were waiting for him. By the end of the workday, Inocencio was so caught up that he forgot about his appointment. Hunger spasms twisted his stomach. He decided to grab a snack somewhere. The last person Inocencio wanted to see was Manolo, but he was waiting for him on the hospital porch. "So, Inocencio, are you already celebrating your triumph?" He didn't immediately catch on to what Manolo was referring to. "Manolo, if you mean the surgery, then yes, indeed, everything ended surprisingly well. I'm always cautious about abdominal procedures because you never know what you'll find upon incision." Manolo interrupted his colleague quite bluntly. "Don't beat around the bush. I'm talking about another operation. Frankly, I didn't expect this from you. I considered you the epitome of integrity, and I trusted you, and you promised to support me." Desperation was evident in Manolo's voice. Inocencio realized that they were talking about his appointment. "My goodness, Manolo, I had no idea. I was called in and informed. Our affairs, yours and mine, involve obeying orders. And don't lose hope, they might not approve my candidacy up top." Inocencio took a step towards Manolo, but he stepped back. "Don't bother trying to justify yourself, Inocencio. I see your actions as a betrayal. I didn't expect this." Manolo turned sharply and practically ran towards the parking lot. Inocencio sadly watched him go. It didn't turn out well, but how could I have known? Inocencio walked home along the familiar route, already imagining how he would be greeted by a deafening silence in his apartment. He felt like howling from melancholy because the budding friendship with Manolo had crumbled in an instant. He spent the whole evening in front of the television again, thinking, "Why am I so unlucky? As if someone has cursed me with bad luck and misfortune." Just when things start to come together, His Highness, chance, crashes in and everything fall apart before my eyes. Am I really destined to muddle through life alone? Sinking into an uneasy sleep, the doctor suddenly remembered that he hadn't seen Katerina, the little girl, for several days. He regretfully thought that he hadn't even attempted to find out anything about the child. Summer was slowly moving towards its end. The first fallen leaves appeared on the sidewalks, and the drizzle increasingly reminded of the imminent arrival of autumn. Inocencio had his own memories associated with this time of year. Ever since he moved, every year on the last day of August, he would visit the grave of his fiancée. When he first went to the cemetery, there was apprehension that Laura's mother might fulfill her promise. But the caretaker who helped him find the spot where the girl was buried started talking. We still remember that accident. People say that Laura had a fiancé in town, and she died right in front of him, and he didn't help her. Or maybe the guy just couldn't prevent the tragedy in time. How many cases like that? This news shocked Inocencio, but he didn't say anything to the guide, who continued the somber narrative. "I feel so sorry for the mother. Poor thing raised her daughter all by herself. Her husband died a month after the wedding. He dozed off in the grass, and out of nowhere, a lawnmower appeared. So, Fernanda remained a widow for life. Men pursued her. She was a beautiful young woman, but she turned them all down. And then her younger sister, Tina, did something crazy, left her own baby girl with her and disappeared in an unknown direction." Inocencio walked along with the caretaker, listening to the story that had shaken him. Laura hadn't told him anything about this. She probably felt embarrassed about her past. "That's the place. Here they are together, mother and daughter." The man pointed with his hand at two modest monuments. Inocencio studied the dates, and he felt sick. Almost inaudibly, he asked, "What did Laura's mother die from?" "She had a heart disease. Surgery was needed. But where to get the money?" "Laura went to the city to earn some, leaving her daughter with her mother. Franca doesn't make much at the post office either. But she's done well. Those monuments are proper. Modest, but humane." The caretaker rattled off his speech, and it took Inocencio a moment to fully understand what he was saying. When he mentioned some girl, Inocencio wanted to inquire further, but the man suddenly became hasty. "All right, no time to chat with you. I need to watch the premises. All sorts of people walk around here, and then property goes missing." The caretaker quickly disappeared down a path between the rows of graves. In that first visit, Inocencio stayed by the grave until evening. He mentally conversed with Laura and heard her cheerful responses. After that visit to the place of sorrow, he felt somewhat relieved. Afterwards, whenever something unpleasant happened, he would rush to the cemetery, and almost every time he found signs that someone else also visited the place. But usually, these visits were not tied to a specific date, and only the last day of August held symbolic significance for him, as it was the day Laura tragically passed away. From the town to the cemetery was about 3 kilometers, and it was a bit challenging to walk that distance, so Inocencio decided to drive to the cemetery. He walked along the familiar path and noticed 2 figures in the distance. At first, he thought of turning back, but curiosity got the better of him. As he approached, he recognized Katerina, the girl who had come to the hospital square with flowers a few times. With her was an unfamiliar young woman, her head covered with a black shawl. Katerina waved her hands excitedly and shouted loudly, "Dr. Gutierrez, it's great to see you." The woman looked at him suspiciously and scolded the girl, "Katerina, you can't shout loudly at the cemetery." The girl snorted to herself, but by now, everyone can't hear anything anymore. Before the aunt could reprimand her, Katerina shifted her attention to her acquaintance. "Aunt Franca, remember, I told you about him?" The girl nodded towards Inocencio. "And you didn't believe me that I'm friends with a real doctor, and you scolded me for taking money from unfamiliar guys." Inocencio decided it was time to intervene. "I'm sorry for intruding so unexpectedly. Unfortunately, I don't know your—" The woman looked him straight in the eyes, and from that gaze, shivers ran down Inocencio's spine. She sensed that she had made a strong impression on the stranger. "Yes, although Laura and I aren't biological sisters, we're very alike. I'm 3 years younger than her, but the age difference didn't prevent us from being very close." Inocencio couldn't tear his gaze away from the woman's face. He thought that artists paint portraits of people like Franca. Her symmetrical features and velvety skin with a peachy undertone gave her a special refinement. The man couldn't help himself. "You really look like her." Franca gave a bitter smile. "Yes, only my little sister didn't live to my age. She was so daring, ready to jump into fire or water. She told me about you, but our mother knew nothing." Inocencio sighed heavily. "Unfortunately, Laura didn't tell me anything about her family." She was embarrassed. She longed for a life of comfort, but couldn't attain it. Franca glanced at Katerina. "I suppose Laura didn't tell you about her daughter either." Katerina was looking at him and smiling. And then he realized what had surprised him about the girl's appearance the first time: her eyes. They were exactly like her mother's, the eyes, or rather, the way she squinted them. So Katerina is Laura's daughter? Then why didn't she tell me anything about her? Isn't it obvious? She was afraid to lose you. I remember, the day before she left, she called me and asked for advice. I told her to tell you everything as it was, but she said it would be better to tell you about her daughter later. Katerina was a little over 2 years old at the time. And when the accident happened to Laura, Mom told me to take guardianship over her. They wouldn't have allowed her anyway because of her heart disease." Franca adjusted the flowers on the graves of her mother and sister. "That's the story of our troubles. Now it's just Katerina and me. We wanted to put up better monuments, but we barely scraped together for these. We have no one to help us, and we're not asking for help." Katerina forgot about her shyness. The girl believed that the man her aunt was talking to deserved her trust. She approached Inocencio and confidently placed her small palm into his large hand. "Doctor, will you be friends with me?" The man squatted down and looked into the little girl's eyes. "I will. Just let's agree that you won't go to the park with a basket anymore." Katerina raised her hands. "But I haven't been going for a long time because Aunt Franca scolded me a lot. And the daisies have withered, now we have to wait for summer." They walked to the road together, and Inocencio finally gathered the courage to ask the question that worried him the most. "Who is Katerina's father?" Franca remained silent for a while, but then whispered, "I'll tell you, but not right now. Is that okay? I don't want to traumatize the child." Inocencio felt awkward. "Just don't think I'm too curious. I just think that a normal father, even if he didn't work things out with the mother, should take care of his child. Unfortunately, such fathers are rare." In that sense, Katerina wasn't lucky. They reached his car, and Inocencio offered to give them a ride to the city, but Franca declined. "Thank you, but it's close by. We hardly live in the city anyway. There's a village nearby, and a familiar old lady lives there. Katerina and I help her. It's time to harvest potatoes now, and Katerina needs to get ready for school." They walked, holding hands, and he watched them go, thinking, "How much I would like to make them happy. Maybe then I would finally taste the true nature of life." This encounter at the cemetery completely transformed Dr. Inocencio's consciousness, and the two figures on the road turned into an insistent vision. For several days, Inocencio was trying to get rid of it, but then realized that his efforts were futile. It was probably all because of his longing. And why didn't I think to ask for their phone number or address? The week turned out to be just awful for Inocencio. He couldn't find a better word for it. Not only were patients streaming in, but Manolo was also doing his best to ruin his life. Inocencio usually paid little attention to gossip, but even Olia couldn't hold back this time. You know, Inocencio, I'm amazed by your patience. If I were a man and heard even half of the rumors Manolo spreads around here, I'd punch him in the face. Inocencio absent-mindedly looked at her. Olia, first of all, I couldn't care less about what he's saying. People who know me won't believe a word he says. Well, as for the rest, it's pretty foolish to believe rumors about someone you don't know. And secondly, of course, I could punch him in the face, but what would it change? Give more fodder for the gossip? No, it all seems rather repulsive to me. And then, what do his words matter to me? They don't affect me in any way. But he had to talk to the former, or rather, unrealized friend after all. Inocencio was on duty for the next 24 hours. His strength was dwindling because the autumn colds had hit half the ward, and he had to work day in and day out. Esperanza joined him on duty, and he was immensely relieved that she was still holding up. Although she had been behaving somewhat differently, lately she seemed worn out, probably too exhausted for unnecessary pleasantries. After the evening rounds, he realized that no new patients had arrived in the last 2 hours, which meant there was time for a coffee break. He didn't want to have coffee alone, so he looked into the nursing station. Esperanza, are you busy? The girl looked at him fearfully. No. Why, did they bring someone? No, thank God. I wanted to invite you for a coffee break while there's a moment to spare. It's a bit boring alone. Esperanza shook her head desperately. No, Inocencio, no way. He was very surprised by her reaction, so he walked into the nursing room. All right, please elaborate. Have I offended you in some way? Or are you still upset about that comment I made in the ward? No, not at all. The comment was relevant. The girl looked up at him. You see, we live in a small town, everyone knows everything about each other. And one day, I'll have to get married. How can I do that when the whole town, the whole hospital, is gossiping about our supposed romance? It's gotten to the point where people think I'm a terrible nurse, and I'm only staying here because I'm sleeping with you. And I'm sleeping with you because you're about to become the head doctor. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes, and Inocencio asked bewilderedly. I don't understand any of this nonsense, he said, and then immediately answered himself. You mean Manolo did this, don't you? Esperanza just nodded. I tried to talk to him, but he laughed in my face and told me not to get in his way. Inocencio thoughtfully shook his head. Yes, I think I'll have to talk to him myself after all. And, Esperanza, we shall go for a coffee. You have nothing to fear now. And suddenly, the girl smiled. Okay, I'll just grab some pastries. My mom always packs so much food for me, but I can't eat that much. They sat in the doctor's lounge until 3 a.m, until they were called to the reception area. The next morning, when Inocencio finished his shift and stepped out of the hospital, he immediately noticed Manolo. He was standing near Olia, vehemently arguing with her and not allowing her to say a word. Inocencio headed towards them. Olia spotted him first and breathed a sigh of relief, but Manolo didn't seem pleased. Nonetheless, he held his ground arrogantly. Good Lord, can you believe that this person, who's used to talking behind everyone's back, has condescended to pay attention to us? Inocencio frowned and stopped. Manolo, don't you think you've crossed all boundaries? It's one thing when your gossip concerns me, but why involve other people in this? What, did Esperanza complain? It's nothing, she'll get over it. Inocencio realized that explaining anything to this person was simply pointless. He swung his arm and gave him a good punch in the jaw. There were quite a few people in the hospital courtyard. Some were rushing in for their shift, some had just finished their night shift. Not far away there was a car, and Arturo was reprimanding the driver for something. Everything fell silent for a moment, and in that silence, the chief mechanic's voice was heard distinctly. "Excellent hit. But you could give him another one." Olia smiled contentedly. "Thank you, Inocencio. You saved me from listening to unpleasant speeches." Inocencio nodded and headed home. Right now, he had only one wild desire: to fall asleep. He didn't even bother listening to what Manolo was yelling after him, what threats he was making, and what promises he was giving. It was all uninteresting. Another week passed, and employees were finally returning from sick leave. As Olia joked, "Finally, the autumn adaptation is over, now we can finally breathe." The news had already been announced that Inocencio was going to be the head of the department, and Olia would be the deputy head. Manolo's fate was also known. Everyone, absolutely everyone, thought that he wouldn't stay in the hospital, especially since he had such connections. But right before the meeting, there was a rumor that these connections were no longer there, and now he was left without a protector. He remained in the hospital as a regular doctor, though some spiteful or maybe truthful tongues claimed it wouldn't be for long. Julio had become so vigilant about the quality of treatment, even making rounds himself and speaking with patients. Towards the end of the workday, Olia sighed. "Well, Inocencio, where should we take our colleagues?" At first, he didn't get it. "What are you talking about?" "That's what I thought. You, as always, only think about work. What about the tradition? To celebrate the new positions. If anything, everyone's waiting for us there, those who aren't on shift." Inocencio slapped his forehead. "Oh yeah, I've really overworked myself. But you know what, I have a day off tomorrow. Olia, do you have any ideas?" "Of course, I know a very nice and, most importantly, affordable cafe on the waterfront. We should fit in there just fine." Inocencio nodded. "Well, that's great. So, let's go for it." She sighed again. "Yes, sure. And I've got some jam waiting for me at home that's not quite done." Inocencio spotted Franca as soon as he walked into the cafe. She seemed to be working here as some sort of administrator, and when she saw him, she became terribly flustered and started explaining for some reason. "Katerina and I don't have enough for everything, so I'm doing some extra work." Honestly, Inocencio himself was flustered. He had imagined their meeting so many times, but now he just didn't know what to say, so he simply said, "I'm very glad we've met." The young woman smiled. "I heard that you have an event today. Congratulations on your promotion." "Thank you. Franca, I need to join my colleagues. Promise me we'll talk more." She nodded and looked at him from under her lashes. Inocencio headed toward the tables where he had been called from a while ago. Olia asked in surprise, "Are you acquainted with Franca?" "Yes, just a little." "Do you know her too?" "Of course, she works in our post department. She's a nice girl, but she's had a tough life. You could say she lost both her sister and mother in one go, and now she has her sister's daughter to take care of. But she hasn't become bitter or desperate, she always smiles warmly." Olia suddenly looked at him closely. "Inocencio, you're not married, are you?" He looked at his colleague in surprise. "What's that got to do with anything?" The woman smiled. No, I was just clarifying." Franca left without saying goodbye. Inocencio got so engrossed in a debate about new ultrasound devices that he didn't notice when she stopped appearing in the hall. When everyone was leaving, Franca was already gone. Trying not to show how disappointed he was, Inocencio quickly bid farewell to everyone and headed home. Fortunately, it was no more than a 5-minute walk from the waterfront to his house. Fatigue and the drinks he had consumed caught up with him, and that evening Inocencio fell asleep without even turning on the TV. Honestly, Franca just wouldn't leave his mind. After discreetly finding out where Olia lived, he mustered the courage to visit the post office. Well, even if she doesn't give me her phone number, I can try. Near the post office, he saw Katerina. "Hello, Katerina." The little girl smiled broadly. "Hello, doctor. What are you doing here? And what about you?" "I asked first. But I'll tell you. I'm waiting for Aunt Franca. We're going to the store with her to get a cake. It's Aunt Franca's birthday today." Inocencio glanced at the post office door. "Katerina, can you help me?" The girl's eyes widened as Inocencio was whispering. "Of course. What do you need me to do?" "I want to congratulate your aunt too, but in a way that it's a surprise. Tell me your address, and I'll buy flowers and come over. Just don't tell anything to Aunt Franca herself." Katerina clapped her hands. "Okay, that would be so cool. We always celebrate all the holidays just the two of us." Katerina not only gave him the address but also explained in detail how to find their house. "See you, Katerina, make sure not to slip up." Katerina smiled. "Don't worry." Inocencio parked the car near a flower shop. "All right, I have no idea what kind of flowers Franca might like. Well, let's go with the classics." He entered the shop. The saleswoman, a woman around 35, lazily glanced at him and then back at her phone. Yes, the service was quite lacking. "Miss, I'd like some roses." The woman, just as leisurely, got up, walked over to the refrigerator, and opened the door. "What kind would you like?" "Choose." Inocencio looked into the fridge. Well, the selection wasn't exactly great. But then he noticed some large, unpacked white roses. "Can I have these?" "You can't have those, they're for another store. But I'll unwrap them for you. You can buy 3 roses. What about the rest? Our customers don't usually go for such expensive flowers." Inocencio smiled broadly. "I'll take them all." The woman nearly dropped her phone. "All of them? The entire package?" "Exactly. Just be kind enough to wrap them beautifully." Apparently, the saleswoman's salary depended on sales after all, as she noticeably picked up speed and brightened up. She quickly arranged a large, even platform of roses, wrapped them in mesh, and said, "Wow! How much you must love someone." Inocencio didn't delve into reasoning or explanations, he just paid and left. The bouquet cost him slightly less than his monthly salary, but it didn't matter at all. Inocencio ate in the hospital cafeteria and had sandwiches at home since he didn't enjoy cooking. Money somehow accumulated on its own, and he hadn't yet figured out where to spend it. He placed the flowers in the car, was about to get in, but then a grocery store caught his eye. Well, it should be the real celebration after all. And Franca is probably back home by now. He bought various sweets, grabbed a bottle of expensive wine, and thoughtfully added some ice cream. The door opened almost immediately. He saw Franca's surprised eyes. "You? Hello, Franca. Thought I'd drop by, wish you a happy birthday. Mind if I come in?" She turned toward her apartment, then smiled. "I sensed that my niece had a hand in this." "Of course, come in." He stepped into the apartment with some trepidation, the same apartment that Laura had been so stubborn about not letting him enter. The apartment was ordinary, without any particular extravagance, rather, it was too modest. Inocencio saw Katerina, who was diligently slicing a baguette. She was so delighted. "Hello, I was starting to think you changed your mind." "How could I?" Franca playfully made a fist at Katerina, and Inocencio handed her the bouquet. "Here, and this too." Katerina jumped up. "Finally, we'll have a real celebration." "Katerina, behave yourself." The woman turned to Inocencio. "This bouquet costs a fortune, you didn't need to do this." Inocencio smiled. I just didn't know what kind of flowers you liked, so I decided to impress you with the quantity. She laughed. You certainly succeeded, and twofold at that. I love white roses very much. Laura liked simple flowers, but I only love roses. I apologize, I'll set the table now. The next 2 hours were perhaps the easiest and most cheerful in the last several years for Inocencio. They chatted about various things, even argued, listened to stories from Katerina's school, shared their own stories. Then Katerina started nodding. Franca got up. Katerina, it's time for you to go to bed. Inocencio stood up as well. He really didn't want to leave, but perhaps it was time. Inocencio, if you could wait a bit, we could have some coffee on the porch. You could put the kettle on for now. For some reason, everything inside him started singing. Could it be that Franca also didn't want him to leave? They spent a few more hours in the kitchen. Then, with a touch of regret, he got up. You know, Franca, I had a wonderful evening today. I haven't had something like this in my life for a long time. She smiled. I enjoyed our conversation very much too. They were standing near the door. Inocencio turned around, saw her eyes, and couldn't resist pulling her close and kissing her. Franca initially jerked to break free, but then softened and responded to the kiss. Franca, maybe. She shook her head desperately. No, I can't, and I implore you not to come over again, not to visit us at all. But why? What did I do wrong? Franca looked at him with eyes darkened by hurt. You took away my sister and mother from me. Leave and never come back. Inocencio didn't have a chance to say anything more. She practically pushed him out the door and immediately slammed it shut. Honestly, he didn't understand much. He only understood one thing: Franca blamed him for everything. Just like his fiancée's mother did. She said back then that if he hadn't crossed his daughter's path, Laura would still be alive. An assertion bordering on fantasy. But convincing a woman of that was pointless, and he didn't bother. Let her blame him if it brings her even a little relief. But Franca, she was an adult woman. How could she believe all this? Well, we'd talk about it later. But they never managed to talk. He waited for Franca at the post office several times, but she walked past with an impassive face, not reacting to him at all. Inocencio became the most regular customer at the cafe where Franca worked. But after a week, she disappeared. The waiter said she had quit. He felt ashamed. Because of him, the woman lost an additional income that they desperately needed. Inocencio decided he wouldn't try to talk to her anymore. Deciding with the mind is one thing, but his heart went crazy. It would sing, then weep, but it definitely didn't want to live as before. That was when Inocencio decided he would just bury himself in work so that there would be no thoughts to disrupt his peace. After 2 weeks into this race, his mother called. Son, hello, how are you? You've stopped calling completely. What happened? Nothing, Mom, sorry, I've got a lot of work. Well, what about your voice? What's about it? Inocencio demonstratively cleared his throat. How does his mom always manage to gauge his mood from just 2 words? She'd be a great psychologist, but she worked as a paramedic all her life. Inocencio, you know your tricks don't work on me. Have you finally fallen in love? And suddenly, Inocencio realized that he had indeed fallen in love. Only he had been rejected. Mom, you scare me. But it's complicated. How can anything be complicated about in love? Oh, you've fallen in love with a married woman, haven't you? Inocencio, you must forget her. No, Mom. What a married woman. I met Laura's sister here. Laura? You didn't tell me she had a sister. Mom, I didn't even know. Not just a sister, but a mother too, and even a daughter. Quite a beginning. I suppose it's this sister. But what's the matter? Why such a sorrowful voice? Mom, right after Laura's funeral, her mother died. Her heart couldn't take it. Franca is Laura's daughter's guardian. And also, she blames me for Laura's and her mother's deaths. But that's ridiculous. I know, Mom. But Franca doesn't want to listen to anything. There was silence on the line. Then his mother asked, "What do you plan to do?" "I don't know yet, but I think I won't do anything." His mother just sighed. They talked a little more and said goodbye. Inocencio leaned back on the pillow, picked up the remote control. "Hello again, my friend." He didn't notice when he fell asleep. He was awakened by a phone call. "Hello, Inocencio?" He recognized the voice of a doctor who worked in his department. "I'm listening, Sergio." "What happened?" "I'm very sorry, but we have a situation. Basically, they brought a girl from the pediatric department to us, and she needs urgent surgery. She fell off a scooter very badly. They kept her in the pediatric department since evening, but they still haven't decided to operate on her. Too much time has passed, and it's too late to send her elsewhere. And if someone can help, it's only you." "Are they out of their minds? How could they keep a child waiting for so long?" "I'm putting you on speaker. Tell me everything while I'm getting dressed." Inocencio changed while the doctor explained the injury. "The girl is unconscious. Her vital signs are deteriorating. Please hurry. Prepare the operating room. Gather everyone you can find." "All right." Sergio hadn't disconnected yet, and Inocencio heard him commanding someone. "Prepare the operating room. Please calm down. This doctor is the best. He'll help. He'll do everything possible and impossible." The first person Inocencio saw when he rushed into the hospital was Franca. She was all in tears. He rushed to her. "Franca, is that Katerina?" Franca nodded and burst into tears. Inocencio turned to the nurse. "Esperanza, quickly get a sedative and follow me." In the operating room, 2 more doctors were already changing clothes. "Thank you, colleagues, for being able to come." As they walked towards the operating room, Inocencio noticed that the entire department was awake. Patients were in the corridor. Everyone was looking at them, and an old woman even crossed herself at them. "God bless you, please save the child." The surgery lasted over 4 hours. Everyone worked silently, only occasionally saying something work-related. When it became clear that things were not going so well, Inocencio raised his hands. "Colleagues, a moment of attention, please. I suggest." He explained what he wanted to do. One of the surgeons shook his head. "Very risky." The second objected. "But she simply has no chance, we're almost out of time." The others nodded. "It's up to you, Inocencio." He knew what he was getting into. An old surgeon had taught him this technique and said, "It works 1 in 10 times, it can be used only when there are no other options." It had never been used on children. An hour later, they emerged from the operating room. The doctors were talking loudly. Someone said, "Look, it's dawn outside, and all the patients have been wandering the corridors since last night." "Inocencio, what kind of chaos do you have in your department?" Inocencio cheerfully replied, "The same as in yours." "Oh, I forgot, we work in the same place." No one asked anything. Everything was already clear. The patients smiled and dispersed to their rooms. The night had been tense. Everyone saw how quickly the nurses were running and how many doctors were heading to the surgery. Inocencio stopped by the nurse's room. "Where is the girl's aunt?" "Oh, Inocencio, after you were there for a couple of hours, she had a major fit. And then she just lost consciousness. We brought her back to her senses, but she slipped back into it again. Anyway, we gave her a massive sedative dose, and she's now asleep in the 3rd ward. There's no one there." "Thank you." He headed to the 3rd ward. Entering, he didn't turn on the lights, as there was already enough light coming in from the window. He sat by the bed, took Franca's hand in his, and started thinking. Why was life so strange? As if it kept pushing him back, not to the same place, but like to a neighboring loop. Maybe it gave him the chance to correct his mistakes? Franca opened her eyes and tried to sit up abruptly, but Inocencio managed to hold her back. Don't make sudden movements, you shouldn't right now. He helped her sit up cautiously. Franca immediately asked, "How is she?" Inocencio smiled. Had to work quite a bit. Katerina knows how to fall in a way that the whole hospital is on edge for hours. But everything will be fine. She might have to spend a couple of months in the hospital, but I'm sure she'll pull through. Franca stared at him for a long time. Thank you. Life is a strange thing. You took away 2 loved ones from me and saved one. Inocencio stood up, walked to the window. Franca, can I ask you a question? Of course. Why did you assume I was responsible for Laura's death? Well, my mother told me everything. You were at the beach. You didn't even try to save your fiancée, you just calmly watched everything. Inocencio closed his eyes, counted to 10. You're a mature, intelligent woman. Couldn't you simply open the internet and read all about that tragedy? He walked to the door, then stopped. For about 3 or 4 days, Katerina will be with us. Once she's stable enough for transfer, the girl will be moved to the children's hospital. He left and closed the door behind him. Franca silently reached for her phone to search on the internet. Several days passed. After the scandal caused by Inocencio, the children's hospital had to face an investigation. Olia sighed and said, "You'll have to keep the little patient with you for now. Let them thoroughly investigate things there, and then you can transfer her." All right, Olia. I need to tell the girls to check on her more frequently. He left the office. A nurse rushed up to him. Katerina has woken up and she is even talking. Well, that's excellent news. He walked briskly to the ward, and the nurse who tried to say that her aunt was inside because she didn't let Julio to settle calmly, and he ordered her to let Franca through, waved her hand. He'd see everything for himself. Well, Katerina, how are you feeling? The girl weakly smiled. I don't know yet. Inocencio went through all the indicators and analyses. Let me tell you, Katerina, everything is perfectly fine. Soon you'll be running around again and riding your scooter. No, I don't want to ride the scooter anymore. But that's for now, and then you'll forget all about it. For now, eat well and sleep a lot, that way, you'll recover faster. He stood up already and only then noticed Franca. Inocencio, wait, the man paused, I need to talk to you. He looked at Katerina, then nodded. All right, let's go. They stepped out into the corridor, then went outside. I'm listening. Franca hesitated for a while, then said, Please forgive me, please forgive me. I never even thought to doubt my mother's words. And then I had no time for that at all. Your apologies are accepted. Inocencio stood up, Franca did too. She looked into his eyes. Is that all? You won't say anything else? Just leave it like this? He stood there in silence. Of course, he wanted to say something, he wanted to shout. What a fool you are. Can't you see that I can't live without you? But something held him back. Probably that stupid wounded pride. Tears started to flow from Franca's eyes. She stepped back. I'm sorry. Inocencio felt like crying himself. Son, if you were a bit younger, I would have definitely taken off my belt. How can you be like this? A woman is crying, and he couldn't care less. Inocencio startled when he heard his father's voice, then saw him and his mother. What are you doing here? From over there. Let's get acquainted. I assume this is Franca? Franca wiped her tears and looked at Inocencio's parents with no less surprise. Yes, I'm Franca. Olivia gently took Franca's hand. I'm the mother of this rascal who made you cry. Don't worry, we'll retrain him. Right, dear? Of course, no need to think twice. Well, hello, son. I almost forgot about parents. Mom kept buzzing in my ear. Inocencio isn't doing well. There's no one to support Inocencio. The parents stayed for 3 weeks. Olivia would disappear with Franca in the hospital with Caterina. Meanwhile, the father would tail Inocencio. Listen, I always thought your fascination with going to that backwater hospital was a quirk, but now I realize you found your place. Everyone here speaks so highly of you. I'm proud of you, son. You've achieved what your mother and I could only dream of. Inocencio smiled. Thanks, Dad. But Valerio became serious immediately. And don't let Franca go so easily. She's a good one, not like your Laura, though they don't speak bad of the dead. Inocencio sighed. Laura wasn't bad. She just had a certain way about her. By the way, she came here to earn money for her mother's surgery. His father fell silent, then looked at him. Well, what are you planning to do? Your mother and I will be leaving soon, and we can't decide whether to prepare for a wedding and grandchildren or nothing at all. Inocencio looked playfully at his father. You know, you're right, Dad. Why to waste time? The staff watched with interest as a procession approached Caterina's room. Inocencio was leading and his parents followed him. The head of the department held flowers in his hands. Even the laziest person knew about the passionate affair between him and the little patient's aunt. Arturo, who happened to enter the department for some reason, sighed. We lost another one. Our doctor is giving in. True, the wedding had to be postponed because Caterina wouldn't be able to attend yet. But they all agreed that Caterina should have been the maid of honor. Does that mean I'll have a grandma and grandpa now? Yes, Caterina. Not just grandma and grandpa, but real parents too. But don't forget about your mom, of course. Caterina squeezed his hand. You're the best doctor in the world. It's a good thing I met you back then. Franca and Inocencio exchanged glances, smiled. It turns out, we owe our happiness to you.